what if we could actually surface the value from the asset, but keep it in the ground?
Who loses power? Who gains trust?
Gold and I guess, have a history together.
What major push is required to go over that line?
That a lot of people think that blockchain creates trust. It doesn't create trust. It preserves trust.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Heuristic Code podcast. Today, we're joined by Karl Schlegel, a strategic catalyst who has helped funds, startups, and major ventures drive 7 to 9 figures value increases through partnerships, M&As, family offices, and frontier technologies like AI and asset tokenization. Karl has advised on billion-dollar tokenization initiatives, navigated cross-border M&A deals, and moderated executive roundtables with leaders from Goldman Sachs, Amazon, Blackstone, and more. In this episode, you'll hear why most tokenization efforts fail. Actually, we'll be exploring lots of things related to tokenizations and what it actually takes to build trustable, auditable system for real-world assets like gold, energy, and infrastructure. Karl breaks down the overlooked tech, legal, data layers that serious investors, founders, and institutions need to understand if they want to operate in the next way of finance. Karl, welcome to the show. It's a real honor to have you.
Thank you, Alex. It's an honor to be here.
All right, so we're going to talk about tokenization, and we've been chatting before the recording started. I'm not an expert in tokenization at all. So we want to structure the conversation so that it's both goes deep enough, but not too much to overwhelm, and also It stays generic enough so that we can have a conversation here. Let's start with just general understanding what tokenization is. What part does it play currently in the world of finance? I mean, it's very generic, open-ended question, probably in a few sentences, just a high overview.
Sure, no, absolutely. I mean, it's a great question. Pre-COVID, we took a look a lot at documents, data, systems of record, but we would really put priority on the documents. So we were in a paper-driven world. Municipalities, most of them, 80% were still paper-driven. So after COVID, all of a sudden, the world shuts down and you have this movement toward digitization. Okay, we got to get everything. It has to be online, et cetera, et cetera. But then you have this garbage in, garbage out, aspect of things. So I think what we're really seeing in terms of tokenization, right, is that the documents, data, systems of record, they already existed. But how are we now accounting for how to connect the value back to these assets or be able to track the chain of custody and the cause and effects that were really taking place? So when we talk about tokenization, a lot of times people think of that and they think of cryptocurrency or they think of blockchain equals Bitcoin. And that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is how do we take these different types of artifacts? How do we use the blockchain? How do we use digitization and the infrastructure so that we can actually connect the dots between different value points in a transaction or exchange of value between different types of parties? That's ultimately what tokenization comes down to. And if you do that at the baseline fundamentals, then you'll actually find that the tokenization process supports business models that actually work. And they bring the added value and benefit of incorporating the data, not as a second-class citizen, as we saw really pre-COVID, but as an active participant. That's what this revolution is really all about.
I have here in my notes that you've been involved in tokenization of in-ground gold.
Yes.
So can you tell a bit more about what was that about, and what surprised you most about shifting from traditional asset structure to decentralized value models?
Yeah, Alex, the gold is an interesting one because gold and I guess, have a history together. And years ago, I had worked in commodities in terms of taking a look at how to put some transactions together, but also how to do some strategic advisory work. I did some advisory work for foreign government. And taking a look at the fact that, okay, it's not just about having the gold bar, but then you've got the hallmark on the gold bar. Then you've got the safekeeping receipt, right? The certificate that goes along that gets tracked and says, okay, this gold bar is from this location.
Hmm.
It's being stored in this vault, et cetera, et cetera. And you can go and access that. Well, already in the gold space, you were having a lot of issues where safekeeping receipts, it was almost at a 40-to-1 ratio. It was like play Russian roulette, just spin it around and see if you were actually going to get a safekeeping receipt for a gold asset or not, right? I also had consulted on a gold bullion stacking model that was about taking money, being able to extract the gold, be able to refine it, be able to mine it, be able to put it in vaults in Switzerland, and be able to take a portion of that money and reinvest it. And then you would see that the investors would literally see gold piling up in the vaults, right? Now, the other side of that was I advised on scan, track, and trace technology for the Kimberley process, which was the conflict diamonds. And in that space, you have the process, but then you have the GIA certificates. You've got uh, the code that goes around the girdle. And the problem there was that if you just recut the diamond, well, you would get rid of that code that was right there. And now it was anybody's guess as to what was going on. The reason that I bring all of this stuff back, right, into gold and in ground is you can see that extraction based models create a lot of risk. If you're pulling something out of the ground, now you're transporting it, now you have to get it from point A to point B, you've got counterparty risk, etc. What became fascinating was, well, wait a second, documents, data, systems of record. When you have a proven asset in the ground, there's a certain standard, the NI 43101 or the JORC standard that you would apply to, but it's really a collection of documents. It's a collection of different types of reports. It's a collection of consultants and tests from different types of established institutions, right, that are coming together. And when you put all this entire package together, all of a sudden you have some asset that's bankable if everything checks the boxes. So why after 5 years is this report no longer valid and it's no longer considered a bankable asset? So this question, along with some of those other experiences about scan, track, and trace, was what led to saying, you know what if we could actually surface the value from the asset, but keep it in the ground? And how could that reserve model actually serve for actually backing real transactional exchange of value, and in a way that preserved the future potential as well as was able to create real world value today?
Has this been implemented like in a production environment? Because that sounds fascinating. I've been hearing about tokenization of different real life assets for a long time, but at the same time, I don't hear much like real cases. Like
Sure.
so, the tokenization of gold, has it been implemented by some companies, banks, or whoever is involved in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, it has. It has. And actually one of the people that I brought to the Gold Plus Coin team that I've been working
Hmm.
with had his name on a patent for tokenizing and securitizing in ground gold, and had done it successfully, right? But there was so much further where this opportunity could really lead to. If you follow the insurance industry, you have appraisers, you have risk, you have an exchange of value, but it's generally based on risk. So you want to do your underwriting. And when you actually take a look at the insurance industry, the reason that art is so interesting to be able to tokenize, to create digital twins of, right, is because they're always looking at how do we make sure that the asset actually is what they've stated on the documentation, right?
Hmm.
And how do we make sure that nothing has changed in terms of those different variables around that asset? If you're storing a piece of artwork in one location, all of a sudden goes to another, just like if you were storing your car in one place and it goes to another, all of a sudden your insurance company goes, wait a second, we might have to adjust that premium rate up or down based on the adjusted risk. In a similar way, you have the insurance companies are really banking on not only the appraisal process, but there's a lot of documents and data and then procedures that are coming into play. So it naturally lends itself to saying, well, wait a second, if we could reduce the surface area that we have to look at and the different variables if we were doing an audit, and how can we condense this into something that becomes more manageable, that we could actually access and cross verify across different types of databases, you can see how now all of a sudden this becomes very, very interesting. In the conversations, even in the US government recently, there's been talk about a strategic reserve, right? And they're talking about a strategic crypto reserve and Bitcoin and different things. But one of the companies that I worked with, we had exceeded test expectations around test data involving involving cryptocurrency, the regulators, futures markets, etc. So already there's been this idea of how do we pull the data and we are able to move it forward. So now when we apply that back to gold, the London Bullion Market Exchange, the LBME, right? They're already very active in terms of looking at gold tokenization. In
Mm.
Brazil, there was legislation that was put forward about tokenizing gold so that this way they could make sure that there were illegal mining activities could actually be curbed because they could be able to track that. You see in the carbon credit space that the importance of being able to calculate what the carbon footprint could actually look like relative to the impact, the output, and then the monetary creation of value or the monetary being able to take value out of the equation. And all of a sudden, that aspect is now being packaged together, but it's largely through a digitization process for being able to track that. So real world asset tokenization is front page news, whether you're talking about the World Economic Forum or whether you're talking about the major banks and institutions. They realize that this is something that's happening and it's already here. And in a lot of ways, this is a place that we were coming to anyway. With the proliferation of cell phones, with IoT devices, we're capturing data about everything all the time. So now how do we use that data to be able to take a look at the world in which we live in and upgrade the financial practices, the insurance practices, the risk management practices to be able to be in line with this data-driven world?
What are what are the main challenges, in your opinion, with scaling this um, approach, technology in the long term? I see that first from what I see. First challenge would be just changing the mindset of all stakeholders that are involved in the process. Are there any other challenges that you see at the moment that prevents this whole approach from scaling up and being deployed across many applications?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the challenges has been this is my blockchain or that's my blockchain, and the blockchain wars, so to speak, right? That
Mm-hmm.
people get comfortable with a certain standard and they say, okay, I'm on Ethereum, I'm using this thing, I'm using Solana, and a lot of these are extensions and derivatives of Ethereum in terms of the different types of blockchains. So the lack of standardization and interoperability, which is something that there's been a lot of progress that's been made, that's something that's necessary to actually create the ability to exchange value on an interchangeable level, just like you would have a currency, right? Where you can truly go in and exchange this for that other type of item. Like when we think of cash, being able to walk in, whether you're buying gasoline, whether you're buying groceries, whether you're buying a movie ticket, whether you're buying a car, cash is seen as something that's acceptable as a means of exchange, right? That fiat currency aspect. So the development in silos sometimes, or the lack of standardization, has been a challenge. The build out of the infrastructure and the mindset of a transactional mindset versus something that really is about building out from an ecosystem standpoint. If you think about Google, for example, Google started making 5 cents on different digital ads. And in fact, the digital ad space got to the point where the chief marketing officers or the people that were in charge of making the decision said, I realize that I'm spending money here and maybe I'm not going to see a great return, but guess what? It's cheap money to spend for the return that I actually do see, right? And so I think what we're also seeing is this democratization of access and the mindset of one that are we building a new world together with different pieces? If we're thinking about building a city, who's building the skyscrapers? Who's also building the piers for the boats? Who's building the sewer systems, right? And if we have that mindset about how we're building together, Now each of us playing in our different areas of expertise, but connecting the pieces together like Legos, now all of a sudden there's an opportunity. But if each of us are building our own things and then we're going, well, I'm not going to play nice with you, I'm not going to play nice with you, or it's only about I'll play nice with you on this one transaction as opposed to really building a new world and coming at it from the standpoint of collaboration for a bigger purpose and a bigger mission and a bigger revenue stream on an annuity basis, on an ongoing basis, capturing the value versus just a transactional basis. I think that that's something that we're seeing taking place right now, that the mindset is one that is starting to shift away from just the pioneers that said, I can make a lot of money because perception equals reality in a market, and therefore the
Mhm.
cryptocurrencies and all the coins that don't actually do anything, don't actually hold any value, and are really just trying to jump to a better coin to all of a sudden exit to fiat currency, etc. I think what we're starting to see is no, digitization actually holds the potential for people to be included. I served on the advisory board for a company that was taking a look at the film production space, and it said, look, in the beginning, you've got people that contributed to a film. Their work might even be in the film at the end, but they're nowhere to be seen and they're not getting any credit for it and they're not seeing any money from it. Blockchain can be a solution, and the distributed ledger process as well, right? If you're storing this in multiple locations between the different stakeholders, now all of a sudden you have a way to be able to make sure that everybody's contribution is counted for. So if we look at a contribution-based economy, an exchange of value-based economy versus a transactional economy, I think that that's where this mindset is starting to really create the groundswell for the digitization evolution.
Question I have now is, how close are we to that beautiful world where most of the processes will be digitized and assets will be tokenized so that everybody can leverage that technology? And what major push is required to go over that line, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's a mindset shift too of not saying it's the Wild West or the regulators, right? It's either we have freedom or we have regulators.
Mhm.
There, you need to have a balance there, right? Of being able to say, yes, there is certain enforcement, there are certain rules of the road, if you will, so that you can have different parties being able to work together. I mean, just think of something basic. Just driving on the right side of the road versus the left side of the road throws a lot of people off depending on which side of the world you're in. Yet that, as a quote unquote basic rule and something that enough people actually follow, helps to keep people on the same page. Oh, I'm in this country, so I got to drive on the other side. I'm in this country, so I have to drive on this side of the road, right? So in a similar way, if we get out of this mindset of it's freedom versus the regulators, et cetera. And we say, okay, where does the balance actually come into play to be able to make things happen? Not how do we drive enforcement, therefore, because we're going to need to enforce, let's exert as many penalties as possible because it's really a reverse tax for building out the infrastructure. If we don't take that mindset, it really opens things up. Now, you asked also about just the hurdles that are kind of coming into place outside of the mindset hurdle. I think there's also a confidence hurdle that
Hmm.
people have, right? Can I actually trust this? I was speaking with a colleague of mine who I'm starting to do some work with, he rolled out the Visa gift card. Right now, you go to Starbucks, you go to any of these different places, CVS, Walgreens, etc., or your convenience store, your local convenience store, and everybody's selling gift cards, right? But at one point, that wasn't the case, and so he rolled out that first Visa prepaid gift card, right, that you could be able to get in the store. So there was a time at which said, well, we've got credit cards, but what are we talking about these prepaid gift cards? How are we going to be able to handle that? I think in a similar way, we're coming to this place of um, a shift in confidence, a familiarity that says this is here and this is where we're going to go. But the reason that the regulators, or the reason that rules making bodies are important, or those that are pioneering those, such as when I served on the Secure Payments Task Force for the Federal Reserve, and that helped to drive the payments policy in terms of moving forward. Now, there were a lot of different stakeholders. There were a lot of people invited to participate, but participating in these conversations also allows you to make sure that you have enough of the voices that are actually being heard to be able to move forward. So the confidence aspect, I think, is one that as we move forward, people are getting a little bit more comfortable and they're seeing where it can go. Now, the regulator, just the last piece on the regulator is it's garbage in, garbage out as far as data. So just because you get everybody to agree this is a good thing, now how do you go back just with CRMs, right? You just have enough issues trying to figure out what data do I keep in the CRM? What's actually going to move the
Mhm.
needle? What holds value for me? So there's also the role I see of the regulators or those governing bodies is to streamline and to say, this is quality, this is not quality. This is how we're able to make it easier so that you're not holding on to, it's like holding on to every receipt in your life or every piece of paper that you ever got. And you're never going to use it, but you're worried about what happens if I actually do need it. I think that area is where you can see great collaboration between the public, between governing bodies and institutions and regulators, as well as between the infrastructure builders and the pioneers and the institutions seeking to take advantage of this.
Yeah, I think it's also related to the crypto technology adoption in general, and perhaps even to like mindset and generations shift. What I mean is that, um, so I haven't been using cryptocurrencies, let's say 5 years ago. It was like a geek thing that, only very small community of people been using actively. And okay, I knew about it, but I wasn't active user. I think I started using cryptocurrencies a few years ago, and every year the volume, like pure volume of money that goes through this mechanism increases. And I see this across the board, like in many businesses and people that I talk to, entrepreneurs. Um, so my point is that, like, as we more and more using technology that we were not really confident with like 5 years ago, I think the level of confidence would grow. And maybe people who are not really driving legislation today, in 5 years, they will. And suddenly you're getting the intersection of increasement of confidence in the technology, adopters, and right point of time to drive to move the needle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the other thing too is that a lot of people think that blockchain creates trust. It doesn't create trust. It preserves trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about blockchain equals trust. You have these zero trust conversations and you say, oh, blockchain is the magic medium for that. It's not, right? And when we talked about contribution before, the more that you can get people's efforts, their actual contribution, the value of that contribution factored into the equation, well, now you see how even in a global world with macroeconomics, you start getting with this digitization, you start being able to balance the scales a little bit and say, oh, what are the imports, the exports looking like? What is the rate of immigration actually looking like? What does it look like in terms of pockets of innovation and goods movement? So you start getting a clearer picture, even for those that are in policy making positions, as to how to be able to balance the scales. So some of the diplomacy, you might say, could even evolve a bit because people are more aware of what they have, what they don't have, what they need, and the impact that it can also have in terms of different types of populations and even ethnic groups.
Karl, how do you accomplish this confidence increase from the technical point of view? So we've spoken about sort of mindset, psychological side.
Sure.
What about the actual technology? Let's talk about the role of proof of reserve model
Sure.
in
Sure.
the tokenization process. Can you chat a bit about that, and how do you see it um, if impacting the confidence in tokenized assets?
Yeah, so the one thing about the proof of reserve that's kind of interesting is that when you're talking about this, you're saying, okay, do I have enough assets on hand to be able to make this transaction at a given time. So it's kind of like a snapshot in time as opposed to a snapshot across. You just happen to peek into the bank vault at a certain point of time and you say, oh, okay, do we have enough there? Yeah, we've got enough there to be able to match what's going on. So proof of reserve, it kind of tells us what an entity holds at a given point in time, but not how those assets were actually acquired or verified. So proof of reserve is something that is becoming, you know, big topic in the conversation. But then when we have proof of activity, that's been something that's been going on for some time, and proof of verification, this starts bringing us back into that harmonization layer between the quote unquote, the regulators or the governing bodies, right? And the standards that are necessary, and then the technology solutions themselves and where the role of the data and the way in which the data actually plays. The other aspect too, from a technology infrastructure standpoint, is that sometimes you can fall into the trap of what has worked before is automatically going to work moving forward, right? What we're seeing right now with AI is that there's research from Accenture, there's research from HubSpot, and what they're saying will be the most dynamic force shifting businesses moving forward is actually ecosystems. So when you think about strategic partnerships, when you think about mapping the value exchange between the different parties, when you think about decentralization, but also records, centralized records that you can actually rely upon, there's this interesting dynamic that is also taking place here as well. So I think it's easy to say, well, we want decentralization, we want the disintermediation of all the institutions, et cetera. No, it's that in and of itself isn't going to accomplish the purpose of building a new world together, right? So you need a balance. Where are those areas that you can actually trust? Where are those, they refer to them as oracles, right? That you can actually trust. One of the things that's interesting about the patent that I'm a co-inventor on for tracking and analyzing worker performance on blockchain, there were two things. One of my contributions was in the nanomaterials area as a read-in mechanism. So having experienced the gold, the diamonds, the things I was talking about, there were all kinds of ways that people would try to get around the tests. You could have a lead bar, wrap it with some gold, put some hallmarks on it, etc. But if you actually insert the quantum dots, the carbon nanotubes, pieces of carbon nanotubes in there, you could have an internal barcode that's part of the DNA of the structure. And whether this is gold bars, whether this has to do with pills and injectables, or whether this has to do with jet engine parts, the same principles apply here, right? In terms of that internal barcode and what can kind of happen. The other thing about our IP is that it's not just taking a look at an event history of what took place and then calling it good. It's you actually say, what is the process that I'm looking to accomplish? Now I take a look at the event history, and now I go back again and say that process was actually accomplished. So what that does is it actually opens up a lot of horizons and opportunity to collaborate, not just with regulators, but with unofficial governing bodies that that they set up their own organizations or associations, and they're the ones who are creating the rules, and other people are expected to comply according to those rules. So you're not just limited now to a certain nation, or a certain type of industry, but you start going to the people that are out there that are creating the policy, and you start taking a look and having meaningful conversations about how that policy actually gets enforced. That also leads to the technological innovation that can take place and the recognition that we need to innovate. We need to be able to take a look and be open and not just have this sunk cost mentality. Well, we already spent so much money on this, therefore it has to go in this direction. And that can be really difficult. But I think what AI is showing us is we can't assume that business models are going to be the same a year from now, let alone 2 years from now. 5-year plans are basically out the window. Now you're down to like 2-year plans, right? When you're doing business planning, et cetera. And there's a lot of unknown variables. But when you take a look at that from a mindset shift as well, and you assume that things aren't going to be static, there's going to be more fluidity, that gets you to rethink the way in which you're collaborating together and saying, you know what, maybe instead of reinventing the wheel over here and kind of building it all ourselves and owning the entire supply chain process, maybe it would be better for Karl and Alex to be able to collaborate together, because it actually means better business longevity and a better opportunity. And so I think the last point that I'll make on this is that with blockchain, And with some of these frontier technologies, you can start seeing collaborations that wouldn't have made sense to take place before in a competitor dog eat dog type of world. But now in this collective survival and thriving type of mentality, the need to collaborate is actually there, which means that you might have GlaxoSmithKline and Pfizer actually collaborating together where to come up with new breakthroughs, or other types of industries that might have seen themselves more as competitors and trying to eat each other's market share. So I think that that aspect really helps to then give us hope as far as keeping up with the infrastructure innovations, the AI chips, the quantum, the different things that are here. If we assume that as constant and we look at the human collaboration and the organizational collaboration in a more meaningful way, I think that gives us an ability to navigate this.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's such a positive view on, on the future. But at the same time, I'd like to, steer the conversation a bit. So when we talk about
Yep.
blockchain, sorry, it's decentralized technology. That means that we're talking about a model where data ownership economy is sort of struggling, especially in conventional industries, finance, insurance, everybody who is selling data. So I see this technology in a way disturbing the industry and maybe industries. I love the concept of collaboration, but still, in your opinion, what will happen with industry as we see more and more blockchain being deployed into conventional processes? Who loses power? Who gains trust? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it goes back to the contribution. What's the contribution of value that you're actually creating in here? And then I think that the influence goes to those that are involved in the verification process. Who's actually the one who is verifying that this took place? This is where geolocation data, right? I've got a
Mm-hmm.
client that has a patent portfolio estate that covers geolocation and geofencing, capturing data and media out of a geofence type of area, drones operating in a geofence type of area. Um, and what we're seeing is that when you take a look at data and saying, did this take place? Who, what, where, when, why? That where is a very key component in the physical world, right? For being able to assess that. So I think what we're actually going to see is those that are involved in supporting the verification of the process and who have the data around the verification, we're going to see an uptick in that. When I was running artificial intelligence SWAT teams back in 2017 at a company that has since beaten out Palantir and C3 in certain types of areas, what was very interesting was to see how, even though you could talk about the technology, it was all about the behavioral shift that really needed to be understood, and the timing being right in terms of being able to move things forward, right? And so even though you have these advanced capabilities, there can be a disconnect. What we were also finding was that companies were holding on to their data, and sometimes from a regulatory standpoint, they were required to. But a lot of times they weren't sure. They'd use 10% of it, 90% of it they want to dump, and they weren't sure what to make in terms of heads or tails. So I think as we move forward, what you're actually finding is the credit card companies really understand this, and the payment processing, because payments, they capture so much information about different types of parties that are underneath there just to be able to authorize a transaction. And by the way, you talk about tokenization. Authorization tokens used in the payment processing space have been around for a long time. People just didn't really speak about it. People in the industry understood that, but mainstream, it wasn't something that everybody talked about. Oh, there was an authorization token that's creating a handshake between these two, parties to be able to allow this transaction to be able to take place, to be able to settle. So this isn't really anything new. It's more the way in which the conversation has been evolving and people are starting to think about it is shifting somewhat. So I think that you're going to see insurance companies relying on data, technology companies, but we're also seeing other things like municipalities and governments are putting a lot more value on data. And that's creating some friction, because that question of whose data is it anyway? Is it the consumer's data? Does Verizon own my data, or T-Mobile, or is it actually my data? How do I actually create value from that? And so as that's being navigated, now you have companies that are saying, well, I want to give the power to the consumers. I want to allow the consumers to interact with the brands on their own merit. And if they want to cancel the connection with the brand, so be it. They're the ones to be able to do it. So as we are getting into that conversation about whose data is it, that can open up additional opportunities that support the infrastructure that's being put in place. The AI chips, the data centers are now going micro down to container sized,
Mhm.
right? With massive output and specific types of applications. Um, so when you talked about the different industries being impacted, the medical industry, we see this because you've got your personal health information, right? The PHI, and the need to be able to protect that information. Yet you've got the Epics of the world and the Cerners, right? The EHR systems, and who actually owns that data, and you'd like a copy of that record. Well, technically it's your data, right? So as we're starting to have this conversation, I think it also actually opens up opportunities for innovators and entrepreneurs to be able to say, let's create value so that everybody's able to win in this equation. So corporations can win, individuals can win, and that data becomes an asset. And I'm a believer that data will actually shift multiples in terms of exits, in terms of mergers and acquisitions. It can move from being a liability to a very powerful asset, and an asset where you actually see an incentive to update that information because of the way in which it helps others. And so now you're seeing more of an ecosystem play instead of just holding on to that data yourself.
Karl, you've been in the tokenization world for a while, and you've seen quite a few pitch decks, I believe. You've been involved in
Yeah.
several startups, private equity-backed operators, talked to family offices. What are the most common misconceptions about tokenization today, and what fundamentals are still being ignored in pitch decks and protocols?
So tokenization doesn't equal digitization is one, right? We go back to that whole notion of people think of blockchain, for example, as the be all end all. I was working recently with a quantum secure communication solution, right?
Mhm.
And what's interesting is that even though you can have these levels of communication that are highly secure, that are instantaneous, that don't exist after a certain point in time, you still need the time stamping systems, right? To be able to track and say, well, party A interacted with party B. So there's a shift in terms of the tokenization and the blockchain as a supporting layer, right? A lot of people talk about AI enabled, and you've kind of taken that out of pitch decks because people are going, well, of course you're AI enabled. Like, isn't everything AI enabled these days? That's not really giving you an edge. What is unique about your business approach? What's unique about the way in which you're using the data, the way in which you're using AI to be able to come to these different things that gives you a differentiated edge? So I think that that's one of the areas that people sometimes can think, oh, if I tokenize my data, now all of a sudden I'm participating in this digitization age. And that's not necessarily the case, right? And blockchain doesn't inherently solve for trust. So again, going back to garbage in, garbage out, being able to talk about the controls in the pitch deck, right? Well, how are you managing this data? What are you doing around this data? How are you making sure that you have good quality around the data so that when you have your special sauce or whatever app solution, et cetera, that's taking place, it actually is based on a solid foundation to be able to move forward. A lot of people get enamored in the technology layer and the app and the user experience, but the user experience the difference between being an amazing, outstanding user experience on the level of the Four Seasons that's intuitive versus a user experience that's absolutely terrible actually goes back to the data. So being able to pay more attention to what is it that you're doing about the data? What are you doing about mapping those relationships? What are you doing about giving confidence and traction, speaking to the traction of the people that you actually have involved around you, not just the subject matter experts, but those ecosystems, but those partnerships that are actually in place, right? And being able to also speak about generating revenue and not playing a valuation jump, a hop, skip, and a jump type of a conversation. Because if you play for the revenue, if you have the solid fundamentals and you go into the revenue conversation, your valuation, investors are likely to say, you know what, I think you've got a conservative valuation based on what you actually can project from revenue. The last thing I'll say is data can really help to create a capital arbitrage equation. So instead of funding an idea, investors see how their capital is going to work, how their capital is being preserved, how their capital is actually working for them and supporting the scalability of the business model. So in a pitch deck, if that can be communicated, and now all of a sudden it's seen as, well, if we get this amount of money in, and then we've got somebody already willing to come in once we hit this point, here's how your money goes to work, and here's how we get to that point even faster, and with room to be able to pivot. Now all of a sudden you're showing an investor, well, this could be the potential exit. This is the next step in the process. And here's how data actually helps the investor to be able to sleep at night, as well as the team to be better aligned with the investor in terms of the mission and the process.
I'd like to wrap up this episode by looking into the future. Karl, if you had to sketch out the next 12, 24 months in real world asset tokenization, where will the real innovation show up? In tech, in regulation, and business model, where?
I think it's going to be around the business model. I think it's going to be mapping the relationships, understanding more of the relationships, the exchange of value, being able to bring in people as well as organizations into the ecosystem conversations that they didn't really have a chance to be at the table before. I think also IoT integrated blockchain solutions are going to be huge. You have a lot of these networks of Internet of Things devices that are gathering data constantly, right? And now who stands to benefit from that? What are you able to do with that? I also believe that the regulatory conversations are going to be a shaping force as things are moving forward. But I also feel that the compliance aspect of it is probably going to be working to keep pace, but it's going to be more of the innovation side of it that's really going to be driving forward. And AI is also, because of the AI getting us to rethink business models and rethink participants in business models and ecosystems and where to create value. It used to be that you could just take a company and say, I'll create a 25% increase in value as a CEO, and that's going to be great. Okay, awesome. Today, it's you better be ready to turn the business model on its head. How do you get more out of the people? How do you align them to the mission? And I think an AI plus people combination where you're really empowering people, but you're empowering them with the tools, whether it's AI, blockchain, other frontier technologies, I believe that you're going to see the companies are going to 10x the ones that really take care of their people and incentivizing and using the brain power and expertise from the people instead of just turning that over to AI. So I think all these factors kind of come back to that collaborative approach.
Love it. Karl, thank you very much for your time. It's been a great conversation about tokenization. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's a pleasure.
And for the listeners, thanks for listening to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button or leave a review on the podcast platform where you're listening this to. Thanks, and see you in the next episodes.